The crystal towers of Serenity Prime shook as another explosion lit up the sky. Tae-min pressed his translucent hand against the window of the council chamber and watched the fires burn across his beautiful city. The Krathen warships hung in orbit like dark clouds, raining destruction on everything his people had built over thousands of years. Bo-Ra rushed into the chamber, her crystalline form flickering with the nervous energy that all Vellani showed when frightened. She carried a communication device that buzzed and crackled with static from the enemy jamming signals. Her voice was soft and musical like all of her kind, but fear made it shake. Speaker Tae-min, the eastern districts have fallen. The Krathen. Ground forces are moving toward the city center. Our defense shields are failing. Tae-min closed his eyes and tried to think. The Vellani had never been warriors. They were artists and philosophers, builders of beautiful things and seekers of peaceful wisdom. Their technology could create magnificent sculptures from light itself and heal broken minds with harmonic frequencies, but they had no weapons that could stop the brutal Krathen Empire. The Krathen were everything the Vellani were not. Where the Vellani were gentle, the Krathen were violent. Where the Vellani sought harmony, the Krathen brought chaos. The armored reptilian warriors had swept through this sector of the galaxy like a plague, enslaving peaceful species and stripping their worlds of resources. How long until they reach the council building? Tae-min asked. Bo-Ra consulted her device. Perhaps 2 hours at their current pace. Maybe less if they use their heavy assault mechs. Another council member, an elderly Vellani named Kyung-ho, spoke from across the chamber. His light was dim with age and worry. We could surrender. Perhaps they will show mercy to civilians. Tae-min knew better. The Krathen showed mercy to no one. They had already destroyed 17 Vellani colonies, taking the survivors as slaves for their mining operations. There would be no mercy here either. The Krathen wanted their world for its unique crystal formations that could amplify psychic energy. The Vellani themselves were just obstacles to be removed. No, Tae-min said firmly. We will not surrender our people to slavery and death. Bo-Ra looked up from her communication device. Speaker, I have an idea. What if we send out a distress signal? The old galactic communication protocols say that any civilized species should respond to calls for help. Kyung-ho made a sound like wind chimes in a sad breeze. Child. Who would answer? The other species in this sector are too afraid of the Krathen, or too weak to help us. But the signal can reach beyond this sector, Bo-Ra insisted. Our main transmitter array is still functioning. We could boost the signal and send it across the entire galaxy. Somewhere out there must be species strong enough and kind enough to help. Tae-min considered this. It was a desperate plan, but they had no other options. The Vellani had always believed that civilization meant cooperation and mutual aid. Surely, somewhere in the vast galaxy, there were others who shared these values. Do it, he said. Send the signal on all frequencies. Tell them who we are and what is happening to us. Bo-Ra's crystalline form brightened with hope. She began working on her communication device, fingers dancing over the controls with practiced skill. The Vellani had always been gifted communicators, able to speak in harmonics that could convey emotion as well as meaning. The main transmitter array was located deep beneath the city, protected by layers of crystal and earth. Even as the Krathen bombardment continued overhead, the massive dish began to turn toward the stars. Energy flowed through the crystal conduits, amplified by the natural formations that honeycombed the planet. Bo-Ra spoke into the transmitter, her voice carrying across the galaxy at faster-than-light speeds. This is Serenity Prime of the Vellani Republic. We are under attack by the Krathen Empire. Our people face extinction. We call upon any civilized species who believe in peace and justice to help us. We are not warriors, but we are builders of beauty and seekers of wisdom. Please, if there is kindness left in this galaxy, help us. The message repeated automatically, broadcasting in dozens of languages that the Vellani communication computers had learned from intercepted transmissions over the centuries. It reached toward distant stars, carrying the hope and desperation of an entire species. Hours passed, with no response. The Krathen forces grew closer to the city center. Explosions shook the crystal towers, and several of the most beautiful spires collapsed into rubble. Vellani civilians fled through the streets, their gentle forms no match for the harsh environment of war. Then, just as Tai-Min was beginning to lose hope, Bo-Ra's communication device began to chirp with an incoming signal. The transmission was strong and clear, cutting through the Krathen jamming like it was nothing. "This is Captain Jawook of the Terran vessel Soul's Fury. We received your distress call. We are en route to your position with a fleet. Hold on." Bo-Ra stared at her device in confusion. Terran? I have never heard of this species. Tai-Min felt a flicker of hope for the first time in days. "It does not matter who they are. Someone answered our call." The signal continued. "SciFiPrime, this is Admiral Dong Hyun of the Terran Defense Fleet. We will arrive in your system in 18 hours. Prepare your people for evacuation if necessary. We are coming to help." The voice speaking the galactic common language had a strange accent, with hard consonants and sharp sounds that seemed almost aggressive. But the words themselves were reassuring. Help was coming. Bo-Ra worked frantically to establish better communication. "Terran Fleet, this is SciFiPrime. We are grateful for your response. The Krathen have orbital superiority and ground forces approaching our capital. What kind of assistance can you provide?" There was a pause before the reply came. "We specialize in removing threats to peaceful civilizations. Maintain your position and stay clear of Krathen forces when we arrive. Soul's Fury out." Tai-Min found the response puzzling. The Terran captain had spoken with confidence that seemed almost arrogant. How could a single ship, or even a small fleet, stand against the massive Krathen armada that surrounded their world? As, if reading his thoughts, Kyung-ho spoke softly. "Perhaps they do not understand the size of the force attacking us. We should warn them." Bo-Ra sent another message. "Terran Fleet, be advised that the Krathen have over 40 warships in orbit and thousands of ground troops. This is a major military operation." The reply came back quickly. "Understood. We have dealt with worse." Something in that simple statement made Tai-Min shiver. There was no boasting in the voice, no false bravado, just quiet certainty that chilled him more than it comforted him. The next 18 hours passed like a nightmare. The Krathen forces pushed deeper into the city, destroying everything beautiful and capturing any Villani they could find. Tai-Min and the remaining council members retreated to deeper levels of the building, protected by the strongest crystal barriers their technology could create. Bo-Ra monitored long-range sensors, watching for any sign of the promised help. When the Terran ships finally appeared at the edge of the system, she almost missed them. The fleet was small, only 12 vessels that seemed tiny compared to the massive Krathen warships. "Speaker," she said quietly, "I think we may have made a terrible mistake." The 12 human ships moved through space with a precision that made the Krathen fleet look clumsy by comparison. Admiral Dong Hyun stood on the bridge of his flagship Busan Rising and studied the tactical display with calm eyes. Around him, his crew worked with quiet efficiency that came from years of training and countless battles. "Sensor report," he said to his tactical officer Hyojin. 43 Krathen vessels in orbital formation around the planet. Standard siege deployment with heavy cruisers providing bombardment support and lighter ships maintaining blockade positions. Ground forces are advancing on the primary population center. Dong Hyun nodded. It was exactly what he expected from the Krathen. They were brutal, but predictable, using overwhelming force instead of clever tactics. He had studied their methods during the voyage to this system, reviewing intelligence reports that the Terran military had gathered about this expanding empire. Communications. Open a channel to the planet's surface. The communications officer, a young woman named Su-Jin, worked her controls. "Channel open, Admiral. SciFiPrime, this is Admiral Dong Hyun. We are in your system and preparing to engage the hostile forces. Can you provide us with information about civilian locations that need protection?" The reply came quickly, the musical voice of the Villani female they had been speaking with. "Admiral, we are grateful you came, but your fleet is very small. Perhaps you should wait for reinforcements." Dong Hyun smiled grimly. The aliens had no idea what they were dealing with. "We are sufficient for this mission. Please provide civilian location data." On the planet below, Bo-Ra looked at her communication device with growing worry. She had been trying to contact other species for hours, hoping someone else would respond to their distress call with a larger fleet. The Terrans seemed brave but foolish. Taemin listened to the exchange and felt his hope fading. 12 ships against 43 was suicide, no matter how brave these Terrans might be. Perhaps they could use the distraction to evacuate more civilians. Send them the data they requested, he told Bo-Ra, and ask if they need anything else from us. Bo-Ra transmitted the information about civilian shelters and evacuation routes. Then she added, Terran fleet, are you certain you do not wish to wait for additional support? We would understand if you need to retreat and gather more ships. The response surprised her. It came from a different voice, one that sounded younger and female. Serenity Prime, this is Captain J. Wook of Soul's Fury. We appreciate your concern, but we did not come here to retreat. Please keep civilians in sheltered areas during the engagement. Something in that voice made Bo-Ra shiver. It was not fear or uncertainty. It was the quiet confidence of someone who had faced impossible odds before and survived. In orbit, the Krathan fleet had noticed the new arrivals. Warlord Vexthul, commanding from his massive battleship Dominator, studied the sensor readings with amusement. 12 small ships daring to challenge his fleet was either madness or ignorance. Unknown vessels, he broadcast on all frequencies. You are interfering with Krathan military operations. Withdraw immediately or be destroyed. Admiral Dong Hyun received the transmission and showed it to his bridge crew. Several of them smiled in ways that would have frightened the Vellani if they had seen it. These were the expressions of predators who had found new prey. Reply to the Krathan commander, Dong Hyun ordered. Sujin opened the channel. This is Admiral Dong Hyun of the Terran Defense Fleet. You are attacking a peaceful civilization that has requested our protection. Withdraw your forces immediately, and release any prisoners you have taken. The silence that followed lasted nearly a minute. Then Warlord Vexthul's laughter echoed across the communication channel. Terrans? I have never heard of this species. You dare to make demands of the Krathan Empire with 12 tiny ships? You have 1 hour to comply, Dong Hyun replied calmly. Use that time to evacuate non-combatants from your vessels. This time, the laughter was louder and more mocking. Foolish aliens, you will learn why the galaxy fears the Krathan. All vessels, prepare to destroy these insects. Dong Hyun closed the channel and turned to his crew. You heard him. 1 hour to prepare. Signal the fleet to take combat positions. The human ships spread out in a formation that looked random to Krathan observers, but followed principles of three-dimensional warfare that few species had mastered. Each ship moved with purpose, taking advantage of asteroid fields and debris to mask their exact positions. On Serenity Prime, Vellani civilians huddled in crystal shelters deep underground. They could feel the vibrations of explosions through the planet's crust as Krathan forces continued their advance. Many of them watched the sky through periscopes and viewing screens, hoping to see signs of the battle that would determine their fate. Bo-Ra maintained her communication station in the council chamber, trying to coordinate with the Terran fleet. She had never seen anything like their tactical displays. The human ships moved with a precision that seemed almost like dancing, each vessel part of a larger pattern that she could not understand. Terran fleet, she broadcast, Krathan ground. Forces are now 3 kilometers from the city center. If you are going to retreat, please do it soon so you can warn other worlds about what happened here. The reply came from a new voice, hard and cold. Serenity Prime. This is Commander Kyung-Soo aboard Shadow Strike. We do not retreat. Keep your people safe and let us work. Taemin had been listening to all the communications, and something in the human voices was beginning to worry him. They spoke like warriors, but not like the brutal Krathan. There was discipline in their words, and something else that he could not identify. They sounded like they had done this before, many times. Bo-Ra, he said quietly. What do we know about these Terrans? Have any of our people encountered them before? Bo-Ra checked her databases, searching through centuries of Vellani exploration records. Nothing, Speaker. No contact reports, no trade records, no diplomatic exchanges. It is as if they appeared from nowhere. Kyung-Ho, the elderly council member, spoke from his position near the window. Perhaps they are a new species, recently achieved space travel. That would explain their confidence. They do not yet know how dangerous the galaxy can be. But even as he said it, Kyung-Ho felt doubt. The human ships moved with too much skill for a new spacefaring race. Their formation was too perfect, their communications too professional. These were not explorers, stumbling into a war zone. These were warriors who knew exactly what they were doing. The hour passed slowly. Krathan forces continued their advance on the surface, while their fleet prepared for battle in orbit. The aliens in the 12 small ships seemed content to wait, making no aggressive moves but also showing no signs of retreat. As the deadline approached, Warlord Vex Thol opened communications one final time. "Unknown Terrans, this is your last chance. Withdraw now, or face the might of the Krathan Empire." Admiral Dong Hyun's response was delivered in the same calm tone he had used throughout the exchange. "Negative. You have had your warning. All Terran vessels, weapons free. Begin Operation Cleanup." The Villani listening to the communication felt their crystalline forms grow cold. There was something in that simple phrase that promised violence beyond anything they had imagined. These Terrans were not the peaceful rescuers they had hoped for. They were something else entirely, something that spoke of war and death as casually as the Villani spoke of art and beauty. The first sign that something was wrong came when 3 Krathan ships simply went dark. No explosions, no distress signals, just sudden silence as their communication arrays died and their engines stopped responding. Warlord Vex Thol stared at his tactical display in confusion as the icons representing his ships flickered and went offline. "Report," he snarled at his sensor operator. "Unknown Warlord, the ships show no damage, but they are not responding to any signals. It is as if their entire electronic systems have been disabled." Commander Kyung-soo smiled inside his stealth ship Shadow Strike as he watched the Krathan fleet struggle to understand what was happening. Human electronic warfare capabilities were centuries ahead of anything the Krathan had encountered. While they had been busy conquering primitive civilizations, humanity had been perfecting the art of war against opponents who might actually fight back. "Phase 1 complete," he reported to Admiral Dong Hyun. "Communication and sensor networks disrupted. Krathan fleet is blind and deaf. Acknowledged. All ships, execute Phase 2. The human attack began with a precision that horrified both the Krathan and the Villani watching from below. The 12 Terran ships moved like hunters who had practiced this dance 1,000 times before. They struck at exactly the right moment, hitting exactly the right targets with exactly the right amount of force. Captain Jae-wook brought Seoul's Fury in close to a Krathan heavy cruiser, her ship moving at speeds that should have been suicide. The gravitational forces alone should have crushed any crew inside. But humans had evolved on a world with gravity stronger than most species could survive, and they had learned to build ships that could handle punishment that would destroy other vessels. "Target their engine controls," Jae-wook ordered her weapons. Officer Min-ho. "I want them alive but helpless." Min-ho fired with surgical precision, sending energy beams into the specific points that would disable the Krathan ship without killing the crew. It was harder than simply destroying the vessel. But humans had learned that live prisoners provided better intelligence than dead ones. The Krathan return fire was wild and desperate. They had never fought an enemy that moved like this, that seemed to ignore the basic laws of physics that governed space combat. Human ships performed maneuvers that pulled forces that would liquefy most aliens, yet they continued to fight with deadly accuracy. Major Hana led the boarding parties from the assault ship Iron Fist. Her Marines wore powered armor that made them look like mechanical monsters to the Krathan defenders. But it was not their appearance that terrified the aliens. It was the way they fought. Humans had evolved as persistence hunters on a world where everything wanted to kill them. They had learned to keep fighting when injured, to function under stress that would paralyze other species, and to work together with a coordination that seemed telepathic. When Krathan soldiers shot a human Marine, they expected the alien to fall down and stay down. Instead, the human would take the hit, adjust for the wound, and keep coming. "Sector 7 secured," Hana reported as her team cleared another section of the Krathan ship. 17 prisoners taken, minimal casualties on both sides. The Villani listening to the combat reports felt their crystal forms vibrate with shock. The humans were not just winning. They were winning while trying to avoid unnecessary killing. Even in the middle of a battle, they showed a restraint that the brutal Krathan never displayed. Flight leader Wu Jin commanded a squadron of human fighters that danced between the larger ships like deadly insects. His pilots flew formations. That looked impossible, pulling gravitational forces that would kill most species. But humans had learned to handle acceleration that came from falling out of trees and running from predators across broken ground. "Gold Squadron, target the command ship's weapon systems," Wu Jin ordered. "Leave their life support intact." The fighters dove toward Warlord Vex Thul's massive battleship Dominator, their small size and incredible maneuverability making them nearly impossible to hit. Krathen gunners fired desperately at targets that seemed to be everywhere at once, never where their weapons were aimed. Wu Jin pulled his fighter through a series of turns that would have rendered most aliens unconscious, lining up for a perfect shot at the battleship's main gun. His weapons fired with pinpoint accuracy, disabling the massive cannon without causing a chain reaction that would destroy the ship. "This is impossible," Vex Thul roared as his weapons fell silent one by one. "No species can fight like this. What kind of monsters are these Terrans?" His science officer, a trembling Krathen named Grixel, studied the sensor readings with growing terror. "Warlord, their ships are pulling acceleration forces of 12 gravities. Their fighters are maneuvering at 15 gravities. No known species can survive such forces." "Then how are they doing it?" Grixel had no answer. The Krathen had conquered dozens of species, but they had never encountered anything like this. These Terrans fought like they were born for war, like violence was as natural to them as breathing. On Serenity Prime, Bora watched the battle through her sensors with a mixture of awe and horror. The human ships moved with deadly grace, systematically, dismantling the Krathen fleet without destroying it completely. It was like watching a surgical operation performed with weapons instead of medical tools. "Speaker Tae-min," she whispered, "I am beginning to understand why we had never heard of the Terrans before." Tae-min nodded, his crystalline form dim with worry. "They are not a peaceful species." "No," Bora agreed, "but they are fighting to protect us." The battle raged for 6 hours, but the outcome was never in doubt once the humans began their attack. Ship after ship of the Krathen fleet fell, silent, disabled, but not destroyed. The humans took thousands of prisoners but killed only when they had no choice. It was mercy of a sort, but delivered with such overwhelming force that it felt more terrifying than simple brutality. Colonel Jun Seo commanded the ground operations from his ship Iron Will. His troops moved against Krathen positions with the same deadly precision their fleet showed in space. They struck hard and fast using tactics that had been developed on a world where hesitation meant death. "Ground forces report Krathen retreat from all positions," Jun Seo informed Admiral Dong Hyun. "Enemy casualties are light, but they are completely demoralized. Most are surrendering without resistance." "Acknowledged. Begin prisoner processing. I want full intelligence on their operations in this sector." The Krathen ground forces that had been so confident hours before now huddled in their landing craft, begging for permission to retreat. They had never faced enemies like this. Aliens who fought with a ferocity that seemed to come from the very core of their being. As the last Krathen ship surrendered, Warlord Vex Thul found himself a prisoner aboard the human flagship. Admiral Dong Hyun stood before him in the detention area, studying the reptilian alien with calm eyes that promised nothing good. "Your empire has been attacking peaceful civilizations," Dong Hyun said quietly. "We have evidence of slave operations, resource theft, and genocide across multiple worlds." Vex Thul tried to maintain his dignity despite his defeat. "The Krathen Empire conquers the weak. It is the natural order." "Not anymore," Dong Hyun replied. "You are going to tell us about every world you have attacked, every species you have enslaved, and every operation your empire is running in this sector." "And if I refuse?" Admiral Dong Hyun smiled, and Vex Thul felt his blood turn cold. "Then you will discover why peaceful species whisper warnings about creatures like us." 3 days after the battle, Tae-min stood in what remained of his council chamber and watched human soldiers help rebuild the crystal towers that had been damaged in the fighting. The Terrans worked with the same efficiency they showed in combat, but their gentleness with the delicate Vellani architecture surprised him. Captain Yunbi supervised the reconstruction efforts, her voice carrying easily across the work site as she coordinated between human engineers and Vellani artisans. She had taken off her combat armor and wore simple work clothes, but something in her posture still radiated the dangerous competence that all the humans seemed to possess. "The support structure here needs to be reinforced," she told a group of Vallani workers through her translation device. "Your crystal formations are beautiful, but they were not designed to withstand weapons fire." Bora approached Taemin with a communication device that hummed with activity. Her crystalline form flickered with nervous energy as she showed him the data displays. "Speaker, the humans have been interrogating the Krathan prisoners for 3 days. What they have discovered is disturbing." Taemin accepted the device and studied the information that Colonel Jun Seo had compiled from prisoner interviews. The scope of Krathan operations was far worse than they had imagined. 17 different species had been enslaved across 43 worlds. Mining operations stripped entire planets of resources, while the native populations worked in conditions that killed thousands every day. "How many beings are suffering under Krathan rule?" Taemin asked quietly. "Billions," Bora whispered. "The humans estimate that over 6 billion sentient beings are currently held as slaves throughout the Krathan Empire." Admiral Dong Hyun entered the chamber at that moment, his expression grim as he carried his own data tablet. The human leader had been polite but distant since the battle ended, spending most of his time reviewing intelligence reports and planning what came next. "Speaker Taemin," he said with a slight bow that showed respect for Vallani customs. "We need to discuss the situation in this sector." Taemin gestured for the Admiral to join them near the window that overlooked the city. Below, human and Vallani, workers continued their repairs, while Krathan prisoners helped clear debris under careful guard. "What have you learned from your interrogations?" Dong Hyun activated his tablet and displayed a 3-dimensional map of local space. Red markers showed Krathan-controlled systems while yellow dots indicated enslaved populations. The red dominated the display like a spreading disease. "The Krathan Empire is larger than we initially calculated," Dong Hyun said. "They control over 200 systems and have military bases in 37 of them. Their fleet strength is approximately 1,500 ships of various classes." Bora made a sound like breaking crystal. 1,500 ships? But you defeated their force here with only 12 vessels. "The force that attacked your world was a minor expedition," Admiral Dong Hyun explained. "The main Krathan fleet is concentrated around their home system and the major slave worlds. They have been expanding carefully, testing the resolve of local species before committing significant resources." Taemin felt his hope fading as he studied the tactical display. "What you are saying is that this attack was just a small part of their overall operation. They will send more ships to reclaim this system." "Eventually, yes, unless we take action to prevent it." The way Admiral Dong Hyun said those words made Taemin's crystal form grow cold. There was a certainty in the human's voice that suggested he had already made a decision about what that action would involve. "What kind of action?" Taemin asked, though part of him already suspected the answer. Commander Young-sik entered the chamber before Dong Hyun could reply, carrying reports from the human ships that had been tracking Krathan's supply lines. His expression was as grim as his admiral's as he approached the group near the window. "Admiral, we have located the main Krathan supply depot for this sector. It is heavily defended, but intelligence suggests they are processing slaves from 6 different species there. Estimated population is over 2 million beings." Dong Hyun nodded as he absorbed this information. "Distance from our current position?" 18 light years. We could reach it in 36 hours with our current fleet." Taemin listened to this exchange with growing alarm. The humans were discussing attacking another Krathan facility as casually as they might plan a trade mission. "Admiral, surely you do not intend to continue fighting. You have saved our world. That should be enough." Admiral Dong Hyun turned to face the Vallani leader, his expression patient but implacable. "Speaker Taemin, with respect, it is not enough. The Krathan will return here eventually with a larger force. The only way to protect your people permanently is to eliminate the threat completely. But that could mean war across multiple systems. The cost in lives would be enormous." "The cost of doing nothing would be higher," Captain Yunbi said as she joined the conversation. Her work clothes were dusty from helping with reconstruction, but her voice carried the same quiet authority that all the human officers possessed. Every day we delay, more beings die in Krathan slave camps. Bora had been listening while monitoring communications from other Villani worlds. She looked up from her device with growing excitement. "Speaker, I am receiving reports from our colonies. Other species are sending messages asking about the defeat of the Krathan fleet. Word is spreading that someone finally stood up to the Empire." Navigation Officer Co. June entered with star charts that showed Krathan patrol routes and communication networks. His analysis painted a picture of an empire that relied on fear and overwhelming force rather than actual military competence. "Admiral, their logistics are vulnerable. If we hit their supply lines systematically, we could cripple their ability to maintain control over their enslaved populations." Dr. Daun appeared in the doorway, her medical bag slung over her shoulder as she returned from treating wounded Krathan prisoners. Her expression was troubled as she approached the group. "I have been examining the aliens we captured. Many show signs of genetic modification for enhanced aggression. I believe the Krathan have been artificially augmenting their soldiers to make them more violent. This information changed the tactical situation significantly. Enhanced soldiers would be more dangerous, but also more dependent on the technology that created them. If the humans could disrupt Krathan biotechnology facilities, they might be able to reduce the Empire's military effectiveness without massive casualties." Taemin found himself caught between hope and horror as he listened to the humans plan their campaign. They spoke of liberation and justice, but their methods would involve violence on a scale that peaceful species like the Villani could barely comprehend. "How many ships would you need for such an operation?" he asked quietly. Admiral Dong Hyun consulted his tactical displays and the reports from his officers. "Our current fleet is sufficient to begin operations, but we would need to capture Krathan vessels to replace our losses. A campaign of this scope could take months or even years to complete. And you are willing to commit that much time and resources to help species you have never met before?" The question hung in the air for a long moment. The human officers exchanged glances that seemed to communicate volumes without words. Finally, Admiral Dong Hyun spoke with a conviction that made his answer feel like a physical force. "Speaker, Taemin, where we come from, we learned that evil only grows when good beings do nothing to stop it. Your people called for help, and we answered. But now that we know the full scope of what is happening here, we cannot simply leave and pretend we never saw it." Commander Young-sik was already preparing departure procedures for ships that would track retreating Krathan forces. Navigation. Officer Seo Jun plotted courses to slave worlds that could be liberated quickly. Dr. Da-un organized medical supplies for the refugees they would inevitably encounter. The humans were not asking for permission or seeking approval from the Villani. They had made their decision based on their own moral code, and they would follow through regardless of what anyone else thought about it. Taemin realized that his people had summoned something far more dangerous than the Krathan Empire. They had called forth a species that would not stop until every slave was free and every oppressor was defeated, no matter how long it took or what the cost might be. 3 months later, the Krathan Empire no longer existed as a functioning government. The humans had moved through their territory like a surgical instrument, dismantling military installations and liberating slave worlds with methodical precision. Admiral Dong Hyun stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched the final Krathan stronghold burn in the distance. The planet SciFiPrime had been the heart of the Empire, a fortress world protected by massive orbital defenses and garrisoned by the best troops the reptilian species could produce. It had taken the human fleet 6 weeks of careful planning and precise strikes to crack the defenses without causing unnecessary civilian casualties. General In-Su reported from the surface, where his ground forces had cornered the last remnants of Krathan leadership in their underground bunkers. The fighting had been brutal but one-sided, with human troops demonstrating the same overwhelming superiority they had shown throughout the campaign. "Final resistance pockets have surrendered," In-Su announced through the communication system. "Warlord Vexthul and the remaining members of the Krathan High Command are in custody. Total military casualties are surprisingly light on both sides." Captain Jae-wook looked up from her tactical station, where she had been coordinating the orbital bombardment that had finally broken Krathan morale. Her expression showed the weariness that all the human officers felt after months of continuous combat operations. "Admiral, what are your orders regarding the Krathan civilian population? They are requesting terms for surrender." Admiral Dong Hyun considered the question carefully. Throughout the campaign, the humans had struggled with the same moral dilemma that faced any civilization capable of overwhelming force. How do you defeat evil without becoming evil yourself? How do you end oppression without becoming oppressors? Signal the surface, he ordered. Tell them we will accept unconditional surrender from all military forces, but civilian populations will be treated according to galactic law. No reprisals, no collective punishment. Ambassador Yuna had spent the past month working with liberated species to establish legal frameworks for dealing with Krathan war criminals. Her efforts had created something unprecedented in this sector of the galaxy, an international tribunal with representatives from dozens of species working together to ensure justice was served properly. The tribunal is ready to begin proceedings, she reported from her position at the diplomatic station. We have documented evidence of crimes against 47 different species across 138 worlds. The scope of Krathan atrocities had shocked even the humans, who had seen the worst that intelligent beings could do to each other. Entire species had been enslaved for generations, their cultures destroyed, and their people reduced to industrial resources. Some worlds had been strip-mined so completely that they could no longer support life. But the humans had also discovered something else during their campaign: the remarkable resilience of sentient beings when given hope and support. Species that had been enslaved for centuries quickly rebuilt their civilizations once freed. Cultures that seemed lost forever emerged from hiding places where they had been preserved by a few determined survivors. Taemin arrived aboard the human flagship 2 weeks later as part of a delegation representing the liberated worlds. The Villani leader had volunteered to testify at the War Crimes Tribunal, despite the trauma that reliving the attack on his world would cause. He found Admiral Dong Hyun in the ship's conference room, reviewing testimony from thousands of witnesses who had survived Krathan brutality. The human leader looked older than he had 3 months earlier, bearing the weight of decisions that had affected billions of lives. Speaker Taemin, Admiral Dong Hyun said with genuine warmth as he rose to greet his visitor. I am honored that you came. Taemin's crystalline form flickered with complex emotions as he took a seat across from the human officer. Admiral, I wanted to thank you personally for what your people have done, but I also want to understand something that has puzzled me since we first met. What is that? Why did you help us? Your species had no obligation to respond to our distress call. You could have ignored it like so many others did. Admiral Dong Hyun was quiet for a long moment, considering how to explain something that was fundamental to human nature, but might seem incomprehensible to other species. Speaker, where we come from, we learned that civilization is not measured by technology or military power. It is measured by how we treat those who cannot protect themselves. Dr. Da-un entered the conference room carrying medical reports from the refugee camps that had been established on liberated worlds. Her work had saved thousands of lives, but the psychological damage inflicted by generations of slavery would take much longer to heal. The physical rehabilitation programs are showing good progress, she reported. But many of the liberated populations will need decades of support to fully recover from their trauma. Ambassador Yuna joined them with updates from the tribunal proceedings. The legal process was moving slowly but thoroughly, ensuring that every crime was documented and every victim had a chance to tell their story. Warlord Vex Thul has agreed to cooperate with the investigation in exchange for life imprisonment instead of execution, she announced. His testimony is providing crucial information about Krathan operations that we had not yet discovered. Taemin found this development disturbing in a way he could not quite explain. You are showing mercy to the being who ordered the destruction of my world. Admiral Dong Hyun nodded calmly. We are, because the difference between justice and revenge is what separates civilization from barbarism. Captain Unbi appeared in the doorway with reports from human ships that were already beginning their journey home. The campaign was officially over, but the work of rebuilding would continue for years. Many human personnel had volunteered to stay and help with reconstruction efforts across the liberated worlds. Admiral, the first convoy is ready to depart. Navigation Officer Seo Jun has calculated return routes that will allow us to check on the colonies we established defensive positions around. The humans had done more than simply defeat the Krathan Empire. They had created a network of mutual defense agreements between the liberated species, ensuring that no single aggressor could threaten the region again. It was a legacy that would protect billions of beings for generations to come. 3 days later, Taemin stood before the War Crimes Tribunal and delivered his testimony about the attack on Serenity Prime. The chamber was filled with representatives from dozens of species, all united in their determination to ensure that the crimes of the Krathan Empire were never forgotten or repeated. When he finished speaking, Taemin looked directly at Warlord Vex Thul, who sat in the defendant's area surrounded by guards from multiple species. The reptilian alien who had once commanded vast fleets and enslaved entire worlds now looked small and broken. "Your empire believed that might made right," Taemin said quietly. "But you discovered that there are beings in this galaxy who are mighty precisely because they defend what is right." Admiral Dong-hyun delivered the final statement on behalf of the human fleet. His words would be remembered and quoted throughout the galaxy for centuries to come, defining humanity's role as protectors of those who could not protect themselves. "We came to this sector because peaceful beings called for help," he said to the assembled delegates. "We discovered an evil that could not be tolerated or ignored. We did what was necessary to end that evil, but we did it according to the principles that define civilization, rather than the brutality that defined our enemies." He paused and looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of representatives from species that had learned to trust humanity, despite their fearsome reputation. "Let this be remembered across the galaxy. Those who prey upon the innocent will face justice. Those who enslave the free will be stopped. And those who spread darkness will discover that there are lights in the universe that cannot be extinguished." The human fleet departed 2 weeks later, leaving behind a changed galaxy. The species they had liberated erected monuments to commemorate their sacrifice. But the humans had asked for no rewards or recognition. They had simply done what they believed was right. On Serenity Prime, the Villani built a crystal monument that could be seen from orbit. The inscription was written in dozens of languages, but the message was the same in all of them. "From the world that tried to kill us, we learned to protect those who cannot protect themselves." The galaxy had learned that humanity's reputation as Deathworlders was not a warning about their nature. It was a promise to those who would threaten the innocent that somewhere in the darkness, guardians were watching and waiting to answer the call for help.